to Promoted. I'm your host, Felicity Fury, CEO of We Aspire. And today I'm joined by the incredible Rht Wooten, aerospace engineer, pilot, and now with a new title because Promoted, you are now the global director at LanzaJet. You've got a global role. You've ditched Australia, your national team. You are heading for space and beyond. Tell us all about your new role and a huge congratulations.
Thanks so much, Felicity. And yes, I am just as surprised as everybody else. I cannot believe it. And I really feel like this is probably the amalgamation of a decade of incredibly hard work, which has come to fruition. And I feel incredibly just overwhelmed and excited for the opportunity ahead. I have landed a global director role for new market development, supporting the acceleration to decarbonize the aviation industry. So what is that role all about? Really, it's just about building local, regional, and global relationships across the sustainable aviation fuel value chain in order to help us secure future customers and understand where it is that people are demanding sustainable aviation fuel to meet their targets. So it's a really exciting space for me. It is a dream job. And I say that because I am all about impact, which is why we run this podcast to try and help people, to grow people and to help them achieve their dream careers and get promoted. So currently the advice we're giving works because I haven't been given a dream promotion. So thanks so much for calling it out.
I'm going to put you on the spot because this question is not planned from before, but what have you taken away from us doing this podcast around promotion and, getting promoted and being great when you get there, whether that's in, your actual job or in other ways? You've recently got awards as well, which is still a form of promotion. Is there any kind of key takeouts from the conversations that we've been having that you think may have helped you land this role?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I think if anything, sharing the lessons that we've had, Felicity, throughout our career and then seeing the incredible and overwhelming support for the advice we're giving and the impact it's having on other people is probably incredible validation to say that, hey, our mindset, the skills that we've built, the opportunities that we've taken on are the right path for what we're trying to achieve here, which is incredible leadership and being promoted and recognized and taking on leadership roles, no matter what level you are in your career and within your company. I think that all of us can be leaders. And so I think that this to me is really validation that, hey, what we've built and the skill that I've created and grown and applied throughout my career are now being recognized to a level that I actually genuinely never believed possible. So for me, this is not only an incredible opportunity to give back to my community and to continue to advance aviation, it's also real and meaningful validation to say that the advice we're giving does work. Being a good leader is so much more than just the skills that you build and the education that you have. It's about being a good person, bringing people along for the ride, communicating openly, if you need to complete jobs, really going out there and grabbing hold of the information that you need to be able to present that back and just having integrity. And there's just so much that goes into it. And I think that, throughout this process of, working together on the podcast, Felicity, we've done a great job in actually trying to put a framework and think about all of those elements in what it means to be a good leader. And I think that that's actually what's helped me be able to maybe synthesize, what is it that's making me be able to achieve a role like this? What makes me successful? And also, what does it take to not only, build these skills, but then have a wraparound community, which are our listeners, to really, bring up, help them kind of achieve a similar level or level of awareness. And yeah, I think just achieve and get promoted. So I don't know how to answer that other than there's so many things that go into it. And I have loved speaking about all of those things with you, Felicity, and I can't wait to continue to share even more with our people and our community.
You are the real deal, Rht. You have been applying. I'm not going to take any credit for this. It is all you, but you've been applying what we've been talking about. And I've been loving, I know you have too, all of the DMs that have been coming into our inbox. I've been blown away by some of the feedback. We're going to dive into a question today. I think you had someone say that they binge listened all our podcasts. I shared that with our advisory committee this week, and they were like, great, bucket list ticked, you know. I never would have thought someone would be binge listening me or you, Renee, but there you go. So please keep on. We're loving the question, and I'm going to jump into the one for today. So we have been asked, we talked about growing management skills by learning to ask the right questions in one of our previous episodes. This listener's heard this before, but wanted to know, how do I actually start developing this skill? I think there's a great Tony Robbins quote, which is, or maybe someone else, around, you know, it's not the power of the answers, it's around, you know, the power of the questions. And say, he who controls the questions controls the conversation, or he or she controls the conversation. Renee, have questions been powerful for you? You actually said before we hit record that it's something that you kind of do naturally. So can you kind of unpack what questions, how has it helped you? How do you do it?
Absolutely. And it's such a good question. Can I just say, whoever wrote this into you, because I think that this really hits the nail in terms of the subjectivity and the gray area of leadership. So talking about growing management skills by learning to ask the right questions. How do I actually start to develop this skill with the question? So, you know, when I think about being told to do a piece of work, my natural first question that follows is, how does that fit into the bigger picture? And I think that that's actually where my questions start to innately come from. So as an example, in my new role, I've been asked to go and understand our customers. So I need to understand, well, what information are we looking for, and why is that valuable, and how is that going to help us, you know, improve our relationship with our customers, and what's the end goal here, and where are we today, and where do we need to go to be able to bridge that gap? So there's a lot of questions that, you know, you can ask about the problem or the project that you've been given up front, but then on top of that, how does this project become the priority amongst all the other jobs that we've talked through that need to be done? So I almost go, what is the flow from the business strategy, the overall company goals and objectives, and then how does that trickle down to where I am today? Where is the business today? And then where are we trying to go? So that's always where I start. And I think that that's the simplest way that I can think about a problem, because I don't want to just go and do something that I've been told to do without understanding its importance, its priority, its impact. Because even if you were to go and do that job and do it really well and then bring it back, what happens if your manager or leader didn't understand that that wasn't actually the real priority, and that wasn't the piece of work that should have been done first? Actually, there was a few other pieces that needed to come beforehand to inform that work. So it's just understanding the bigger picture for me, I think. And then as soon as I'm clear on those questions and answers, it helps me very clearly do the task, but then also take the stakeholders that I need to work with, and make sure I'm storytelling really well so that I can show other people the impact of that work as well. Because that will always be the first question to anybody that you go to is, well, how does that fit in with their priority? Will that impact them? If so, how? And do they have time for that? So I think that's where I would start. Felicity, what do you think?
I think naturally always been curious, even growing up. If I look back, you know, when I was a kid, that curiosity was always there. And I feel like that really is the job of the leader, is to be curious. And there's a great quote from Ted Lasso, you know, be curious, not judgmental. And I think that has really served me well, that natural curiosity. I remember being at school, looking at a set of stairs and thinking, how do I stay up? They don't have any supports in between. How does that even work? And my physics teacher actually wrote me a note, and as I left school, and it was a card that said, never stop asking questions. And I must have drove my teachers completely nuts, because I would just be going, but why, but why, but why? And it's just, tell me about that. And like you, I need that context, that bigger picture. And I just love figuring out how things work. So, you know, no surprise that I went and did an engineering degree. But yeah, that natural curiosity has always been there, and asking why. And then in my 20s, I met a mentor. Actually, he was Michael, my husband's mentor first, and he talked about asking why 5 times. And that was a really helpful strategy for me to really uncover the source or the what's at the bottom of this problem, or what's the bottom of this thing that I'm trying to work on, or what's behind someone's motivation. Like they might go, oh, I want to get a promotion because I, want to earn more money. But why do you want to earn money? Oh, well, actually, I want to provide for my family, or I can see this other opportunity. Okay, well, why is that important to you? Oh, well, actually, if I went on a holiday to Vietnam, then I want to go volunteer. Oh, okay, why is that important to you? And you can actually really uncover what's behind a lot of things when you ask why, literally 5 times. It's actually quite hard to say. And naturally, yeah, I've had that curiosity and asking questions. And it's something that I hadn't really thought about as a specific skill. I think it's important also, it's a kind of like a mindset. And I think growing up through school, the way that we have been taught, and a teacher said this to me once, which was, we train people today in learned helplessness. So what does that mean? That is, well, okay, you go to a test, you go remember facts, you go remember information. So, that is work in school around critical and creative thinking, but a lot of it is rote learning and remembering things. And even at university, that's how we do tests. That's often how we're assessed at university. So we don't really get trained to ask questions, to think outside the box. We're, trained in this process of remembering information and sitting down and doing a test. So I think it's quite unusual for us to have developed this skill really in asking questions. And for the listeners listening in, it might not be something that you've considered before because you're going into your role being, wanting to be excellent at your job, which is fantastic. But if you're not asking those questions around why, then it can be tricky to see that bigger picture.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would almost say that, again, the opportunity in asking why really then helps other people be able to answer and get very clear on why they're doing that piece of work. And if they can't answer that, then you've probably found not a crack in their thinking, but potentially a missed thought, a missed piece of education that they weren't clear on either. And I think that that's true leadership in a sense, is helping others uncover the why, because that is always innately the first question anybody asks. Why would we do this over something else? Why am I going to spend that budget rather than this? Why would I hire that person rather than this person? Like, I think if you're so clear and, truly convince people about what's important, why it's important, then people will learn to trust you. And again, it shows that you care about your work. And I think it leads people to kind of build an awareness that you do have the bigger picture in mind, which is so important when it comes to prioritizing the work. So
yeah, absolutely.
That answers it for
yeah. It's great. I think, and another point that you just reminded me of was that there's the piece of asking why of yourself, but then also asking why of others. And it's a great way to also unpack if you've got a leader or a mentor or someone who's around you that you want to learn from. They might give you the answer, but you could follow that up by saying something like, I really want to see how you thought about that and how you came to that conclusion. Would you mind explaining your thinking behind that? And then they can actually step you through their process and how they thought about it. And one actually amazing boss of mine trained me in this early on. Her name was Mary, and it was at Brisbane City Council. And I remember when I had to make a decision, the first thing she would do is go, okay, I want you to come up with 3 options for the decision. So I'd go do that, and then I'd come back, here are my 3 options. So she kind of trained me in that a bit. And so she started to unpack and figure out my thinking. Then she would say, okay, now I want you to pick the answer that you want and then why you want to take that forward. So I'd start that process. And then eventually she said, okay, I just want you to come to me with the answer. I don't care about the options. But she'd embedded that thinking process. So I think sometimes if you're not someone who is naturally asking questions, it can feel a bit uncomfortable or a bit unfamiliar. And there might be a process to step through before you are really, honing in on that skill as well. But I think it's an incredible one that everyone should be doing. And it can also help you figure out, like, if there's, I don't know if you've had this, Renee, someone in your team who's pissed you off. I don't know if you've ever had that before.
I certainly have.
And sometimes you just want to be like, they're clearly an idiot. what the heck are they doing? But if we flip that rather than, my first response usually is anger. And then I go, okay, pause, like, step back here and go, that's really interesting that they behaved in that way. Wonder why they did that. How does the world occur for them that is the solution, that's the answer? So I think these are some of the questions that we can ask. And it helps us take a step back from that kind of, day-to-day of the chaos of people.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to ask you, Felicity, what do you think are the implications if you don't ask why?
Good question. Well, I think one of the challenges can be, say you've had a boss or a manager give you a direction, and I've done this before. You're like, okay, great, I'll go implement it. And then you start to implement it, but people ask you why. And then you don't have that justification or reasoning to back it up. And it can be quite tricky, I think, too, if you have to implement a decision that you might not necessarily agree with. And often if it's a decision I don't agree with, sometimes I might get frustrated. And when I'm in the zone of frustration, I might not ask that question. Why? How does this work? So I think it can have a real impact on projects, on your effectiveness to communicate if you're not clear on the why. And it also can be tricky if you need to communicate with a whole range of stakeholders, which is what I usually need to do when if I'm working on engineering projects, to be able to adapt your messaging to the stakeholder that you're working with to make it important to them. So I think that's something I always keep in mind is when I'm having a conversation with someone, what's the most important thing to them rather than what's the most important thing to me. So to really understand that, you have to ask why. And if you don't, then you can be in a real pickle and things just take longer. And one of my values is efficiency and effectiveness. So I feel like that probably drives me in asking these questions. How about for you?
Yeah, I think that this is where, if you want to be seen as a leader, you have to preempt those sorts of questions and be able to demonstrate that you understand why you're doing the work you're doing. And I think that, again, that just speaks to your ability to communicate, your ability to build trust. So I think it's just that why means so much more than just being a good leader. It's, being able to back up and justify the piece that you're doing. But just to the question that was asked as well, I do think that this is a foundational tool that you've just talked through and asking the 5 whys. But what I also think is sometimes, even if you get those answers, sometimes you still may have forgotten something. You may not have all of the context. And so that will come with experience, but even asking why something is important, not only from your manager, but from those other stakeholders. So, and the beauty and the opportunity in that is once you go to them and you get that clarity, then you can change the way that you pitch to different stakeholders to get their buy-in. So it's almost like a mechanism to say, hey, I've been asked to do this piece of work. I want to understand why that's important for your team. So that when the next team member comes along that you have to work with, you can turn around immediately and say, this is why it's important for you and your team, and this is what I need from you in order to kind of progress that work. So again, I think that over time you learn to ask what questions are really important. You learn to understand the importance of working with multiple people and getting multiple people's perspective and remaining open-minded through that as well. So, yeah.
And I think, it's important to notice that the question was, how do I practice these skills? And I think like a lot of the things that we talk about here in this podcast, they are skills to practice and develop. And if you're in an environment like I've been in where it's engineering and it's high risk, these projects are really important. And also your career is probably really important to you too. If you're listening to this podcast, I bet it is. So often I have found it tricky to practice in those real work situations. So if that's you and you're not feeling quite comfortable practicing these suggestions and this conversation in your workplace, find a safe space for you. It could be something simple like your local netball team, if you're playing in a sports team, if you're volunteering on a committee, start to test it out in a safe space like that with your friends and family, with your partner at home, and have that practice there first until you feel like you're getting the confidence to bring that into your workplace as well. Because these skills take time to actually develop, grow, and practice till you feel confident. So if it's something that you're not yet confident, then my suggestion would be to practice, a simple one, just asking why, like we talked about here, can be really effective if you're doing it in a safe space and building up that confidence. Final thoughts on this one, Renee, before we wrap up?
I actually just had the thought, what if you get an answer that you don't agree with? But
So
maybe
what
that's
you-
always a topic. Yeah. Like if you go to your manager and you ask for their thoughts on, why this is important and they can't answer you, then you're put in a relatively compromising position. So what would you do in that case? For me, I would probably go to somebody in a similar level or somebody else that I trust within the business, or go and have a conversation within your team and try and get more information. I think that there is a perception that your manager or your leader has all the answers, and sometimes they don't. So don't take something as gospel the first time you hear it, or make sure you challenge the feedback that you're getting as well, because I think that again, if things are clear once you've spoken to a leader or a manager, then to me that's indicative that they know what they're speaking about. They're clear on why they're doing it. But if you're left feeling a little unknown, and again, it doesn't map back to the main strategy, or there's just something that is a bit too vague, keep asking more questions.
Yeah, and you just reminded me, Renee, on the other podcast that we've got, which is Emerging Excellence, which we often host with Rht, who's the CEO of QLE. So shout out to Rht. I loved his response. If someone's, we talked about, doing a town hall, and what if someone asks you a question in a town hall that you can't respond to? That's a high pressure situation in front of the entire company. And he said he's got 3 responses. He'll tell them the answer if he knows it. If he doesn't know it, he'll say, I'll go away and find out. And if he does know, but he can't tell people, he'll say, look, I know the answer, but I can't tell you. And I just thought, wow, you could always, tell an honest, truthful answer. And I liked how he said, sometimes you just can't actually tell people, and just be straight about that rather than pretending. And he also, another piece that Rht talks about is challenging the brief. So I love this. I asked my son Winston the other night, what toothpaste do you want? Do you want milkshake? These are the kids' toothpaste, those like bizarre. Milkshake or raspberry? Seriously, it tastes amazing. Do you want milkshake or raspberry? And he goes, I'll have both. We're like, oh, let's put flavor the toothpaste on. But Rht talks about challenging the brief. And I think we can always challenge the brief. And if you're working for a leader who's great, which, maybe you're not, if they're okay with, if they're a great leader, they'll be okay with you challenging the brief. And in fact, I would say if someone did that for me, I would admire them, that they're having the courage to ask, and what a great opportunity for a conversation. So that'll be my final thought, is you can say you don't know, you do know, and you do know, but you can't ask, and to challenge the brief. So fantastic question. I love seeing that come through the DM. If you do have a question for Renee and myself, send us a message on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you and share your question here on the Promoted podcast. Renee, been awesome. Congratulations again on getting promoted. I know you'll be great when you get there.
Love it. Thank you so much, Felicity. Great chatting.